So we're doing metabolites, which is not a terribly long lecture. And then we're going to break out. And we have 3 different things we're going to accomplish in the breakouts. Those of us who still need to finish the gizmo are going to work on the gizmo. There's a couple of us that need to work on the wiser me, and you're going to work on that. And maybe, you know, one of these 2, maybe we don't have it done because you're having technical difficulties. And so I'd like to work with you to see what's going on with that. And then everybody else is going to work on a case study of 7 mysterious deaths. So hopefully you'll find that fun. We'll get it done today while we're here. That way you can leave and not think about AP biology for today or tomorrow. We are going to have a test next Thursday. So I'm in the process of picking out useful resources from my folders to post. So I haven't posted that yet. There are practice questions that I posted in AP Central. If you wanted to do some of the practice questions, I think a couple of you maybe did some over the weekend. So that'll get posted. We have 1 topic left, that's fermentation, so we'll do that Monday when we come back from break. Wednesday will be a review day, and then Thursday will be our test. Any questions on the agenda? All right, so here's new content. You were exposed to this in a worksheet, in one of the POGOs maybe. It asked you where like glycogen would enter the whole metabolic process, where maybe it asked you about starch, I don't remember. No, glycogen and proteins and lipids, it asked you where do they enter, right? So we're getting food from, or we're getting nutrients and energy from all of the food we eat, not just sugars. So that's where we've always learned cellular respiration with like glucose and glycolysis, which is really a simplified version of cellular respiration, because that's only accessing energy from glucose. And we know that we get energy from all of the foods we eat, right? So that's what this PowerPoint is about, is what do we do with the other nutrients? So we want to identify where proteins, lipids, and other carbohydrates enter the cellular respiration metabolic pathway. And I have this link here. So if the PowerPoint is like, you know how we're just bulleted notes really, if that's not enough for you, this is a Khan Academy and this is linked in Google Classroom. And I thought this was so much easier to understand maybe because they've cut out a lot of the pathway and they're just showing you visually where all of these enter. And it's just broken down into an easy to understand process. So that link is in there. You might want to review that. And then we're also going to relate digestion and synthesis to metabolism. So we break down food not just for energy, but we break down food in order to build cells and tissues, right? So we need to talk about that as well. So this is all old news, right? We had glucose entering and breaking down through the process of glycolysis out in the cytosol to create pyruvate. In the process, we created 2 ATPs with substrate level phosphorylation, so it was with the help of an enzyme. And then we went through the link process, the link reactions to make acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA then entered the Krebs cycle where we released a couple more ATPs. But more importantly, we made NADH and FADH2. Those 2 things carried electrons into the electron transport chain, which is called chemiosmosis. Remember the process of moving hydrogen, and the electrons are attracted to oxygen. So this is an oxidative phosphorylation to make lots more ATP, 32 more ATP molecules. Okay, so this is, like I said, then we want to branch from that beyond glucose. So polysaccharides, that should be pretty easy. We know polysaccharides can be broken down into individual monomers. Those monomers we know are glucose. So like whether it's starch or cellulose or glycogen, it's all going to be broken down into glucose. And then you can imagine it's going to enter glycolysis just like it would, right? Because it's now glucose. So that's pretty easy. Remember the process for breaking molecules down was hydrolysis. We had dehydration synthesis building up, hydrolysis breaking down. So other 6 carbon sugars can also easily be modified into a glucose form, in which case they would enter this process at the beginning of glycolysis as well. I got my clicker so that my toolbar doesn't keep popping up, but now it's not working. All right, I give up on that. Okay. So then what about proteins? So when you break down proteins, we know we get individual amino acids. So now look at the components of amino acids, and you want to see where could you fit each of these molecules or components into the whole cellular respiration process. So what molecule within cellular respiration do they most closely relate to? The ammonia piece, there's no place in the cellular respiration that we use nitrogen, right? So all of those amine groups are going to become nitrogenous waste, perhaps ammonia, urea, uric acid. We get into those in anatomy in the urinary system. Then when you look at what you have left, you have a 2-carbon skeleton, right? Where do I see 2 carbons in the process of cellular respiration? Acetyl-CoA, right? So this can be converted into an acetyl-CoA group, or it can enter into glycolysis, and we'll see that in a minute. Then we have our glycerol, this 3-carbon compound. Where do we have a 3-carbon compound in the whole cellular respiration process? Pyruvate, right? So this can enter, glycerol of a triglyceride can enter in as pyruvate at the end, or G3P, at the end of glycolysis. Then these are going to be broken into 2 carbon pieces where they enter into the link reaction or into the Krebs cycle as acetyl-CoA. So we chop those up into a bunch of 2s. So you can see why you get a lot more energy from a lipid molecule than you do from a sugar molecule. Because if you break those up, like how many sets of 2s are you sending into the Krebs cycle? Lots of them. Okay. So fats generate twice as many ATP versus carbohydrates, and it's because of those carbon-carbon bonds, right? So there's a lot more carbon-carbon bonds to enter in, as we saw with all the circlings, right? So all of those bonds, every time you break the bonds, you release your energy. There's more oxygen in a gram of carbohydrates versus a gram of fats. So it's already partly oxidized, right? So we're not going to get as much energy because it's already lost electrons. It's already partially oxidized. So there's less available to get. Okay, so here's the process you're looking at. So this is cellular respiration. If you took glucose and you went straight down, right? Glycolysis, acetyl-CoA, Krebs, electron transport. So now you're breaking these other molecules apart. So different sugars can enter the glycolysis process at different points. So they can be converted into a 6-carbon and enter in here. Our proteins, we said, can be broken down into their 2-carbon chain. We're going to get rid of all of our amines. So they're either going to enter in acetyl-CoA, or if they're combining with other molecules, they can enter in as pyruvate. They can enter the Krebs cycle as well. Glycerol is a 3-carbon compound. It's going to go in here as G3P and be converted into pyruvate. And our fatty acids we saw are going to be broken down into pieces of 2. Okay, so if you look to see how it can be broken down, then where does that smaller piece fit? I think that that's a helpful way to look at it. Okay, so this overall process has to do with digestion, right? Catabolism, the breaking down of molecules. If you remember, metabolism is the sum total of all chemical reactions. It's both building up and breaking down, not just the breakdown, which we kind of usually think of it only that way. So when our body needs energy, they're going to break down molecules. Synthesizing, when I have access, I can build things up, right? So our body needs to break things down, but it also needs to synthesize molecules. Even for like just cell reproduction, we need to be able to synthesize materials. So remember, this part is anabolism. So when the organism has enough energy or enough nutrients or enough materials, it's able to go through the anabolic process of creating more tissue, more cells, more proteins, more carbohydrates. This is all regulated by enzymes. And you can think back to our allosteric conversation, right? We talked about feedback loops and how that final product can act as an allosteric inhibitor. So when we have enough of something, like we have enough tryptophan, we don't need to make more tryptophan, right? So we've talked about that earlier. So that's all part of our feedback mechanism. So the material itself can stimulate production of other things. When you have something that needs broken down, you're going to stimulate the production of enzymes to break that molecule down. So typically we're breaking down carbohydrates, fats, and proteins through the same pathway. They just enter in at different points. So all of those molecules we can extract energy from. We talked about 4 calories per gram for proteins, carbohydrates, 9 calories for fats. And we saw why that is, because there's more and more carbon bonds. So when we're building stuff, if we have enough energy, we can build things, right? If we don't have enough, we can't build things. So the cell uses points in the glycolysis and Krebs cycle as links to pathways for synthesis. So this is kind of cool. You've never thought about this before, but these molecules at any point can also exit the cellular respiration and enter a synthetic phase, a synthesis phase, to build materials. So pyruvate can be used to build more glucose. Amino acids can come out of the Krebs cycle to build proteins. So these same materials that we get from breaking down, we can use to build up. So the pathway goes in both directions. And I don't think that's something that you've heard before in our discussions of cellular respiration. So it's always kind of cool to see that it works a different way. So if you have excess, that's going to build fat tissue. So when you look, I think this makes it look very complicated. That's why I suggested the more simplified version that you get from Khan Academy. So this is showing you the metabolism of carbohydrates. So it's both the breaking down and the building up. So this pathway here is the breakdown, but you can see you can exit out at any point and you can build other molecules. It does look like a subway map, doesn't it? If you've done any traveling. Glucogenesis. Okay, so metabolism of lipids, same thing. So here's our original pathway, right? We know we typically enter in as acetyl-CoA into the Krebs cycle, but we also can exit out to synthesize material. So when we have excess, we don't need to keep breaking it down. We don't need to use our energy to break down food if we don't need any more energy, right? So then we're going to store the excess in the form of fats. And then here's your amino acids. There's 20 different amino acids, so you can imagine there's many steps along this pathway. Again, you're going to typically enter in at the Krebs cycle if you're breaking amino acids down. But if you have more than enough, we're not going to make enzymes to break them down. That's waste of materials and energy, right? So now we're going to store them as proteins. So at any of these points, you can come out and build different, you see cysteine, methionine, lysine. So all of these different amino acids would have a different pathway. Makes sense. So the pathway goes in both directions. That's the big takeaway. You have 8 essential amino acids. I've always known of 8, and I've read in one resource 9. Essential amino acids means you can't synthesize them. You have to get them in your food, or you will not have them. So the other 12 our body can synthesize, and this is that pathway for the other 12 non-essential amino acids. That made me want to talk about something I don't remember now what it was. Nucleotides, same thing. We can build up nucleotides by exiting the pathway to create the different nitrogenous bases and the sugars needed for ribose or deoxyribose that is in the nucleotides. So you can see oh man, I missed fixing these letters. Acetyl-CoA plays a very important role. We saw it with glucose, we saw it with, we saw it with carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins as an entrance and an exit point for building or breaking any of those down. So that seems to be the most common molecule. So that is our maybe most important one. So both in the breakdown and the synthesis of all those different molecules. This is the coenzyme A, and then the acetyl group is a 2-carbon compound, so it would fit right here with the acetyl, or with the coenzyme, and now it's acetyl-CoA is what enters the Krebs cycle. So depending on your need, you're either going to make energy or you're going to store it. So you can use your ATP immediately, or you can store it away as fat to be used later. Okay, I guess that's the last slide. So be able to talk about each of the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. Where do they typically enter into the Krebs cycle? And then just know that you can exit the Krebs cycle to build those molecules as well. That's the big takeaway from that. Okay. So what questions do you have for me? It was super fun. It's relatively short. No questions? Okay, I'm going to do some breaking out with you guys. I got a group that I'm going to grab to do the gizmo. I have a group that I'm going to grab to do the wiser me. And then I'm going to break who's left into groups to work on the 7 mysterious deaths.